So hello, thank you guys, and welcome to the FRB Farmer Forum. My name is Sierra McDonald, and I am the product manager here at Front Range Biosciences, and I will also be the moderator for today's webinar. We are very excited to get this webinar series kicked off, so thank you for joining us in the first of many webinars that we will be hosting this year. Next slide, V. All right, so today we are going to talk about how to prepare for the 2021 hemp season. Some of the topics that we'll be focusing on are soil and water testing, how to develop an irrigation plan, preparing your field for planting, and the importance of good genetics. Next slide. All right, so who are we? For those of you that don't know us, Front Range Biosciences is a premier hemp genetics company. We focus on creating new genetics that are field tested, farmer approved. We have a very large variety. We have a large variety of proprietary hemp varietals featuring unique cannabinoids, high terpenes that have all been developed by our team of plant scientists. Our varieties have been verified through genomic markers, true to type testing, and field tested by farmers in over 22 regions in the US. Next slide, please. All right, so let's meet today's panelist. We have Megan Coneybear. Megan is FRB's technical agronomist and sales specialist. We also have Ben Holmes. Ben is our director of breeding here at Front Range Biosciences. And we are very excited to be joined by our special guest today, Janie Maidler. Janie is the COO of Riley Sunshine and VP of Riley Smiles Foundation. She is also a member of our Elite Field Trials program here at Front Range Biosciences. Riley and her mom, Janie, are also featured on the documentary CBD Nation. If you haven't done so, please check it out on Amazon. You will learn a lot more about Riley and her fight to bravely take control of her medical journey. All right, so let's get this started. If you guys have any questions throughout the webinar, please post them in the chat and I will do my best to answer them, or we will get to them at the end during our Q&A session. Okay, Megan, take it away. You're muted.
Talking to myself over here. Thanks so much, Sierra. That was a great intro. So I'm going to start by talking to you about the foundation of your grow, which is your soil. And starting out with determining your soil type, there's a really great resource online from the federal government called the Web Soil Survey. And you're actually able to go on there, identify your area of interest, which would be your field or your farm, and get a complete soil profile printout of your soil series and any unique characteristics of your soil. And it's a really great place to start, learning about your soil and developing a great working relationship with your soil. Once you have an idea about how your soil works and its unique characteristics, we always move on to testing the soil. And so this is nutritional testing for pH, fertility, and soil nutrition. And we recommend testing the soil at least twice a year. You want to test in the spring before planting to make sure that your soil is optimized for your crop and to make any modifications to your soil chemistry or soil fertility that you may need to before planting. And you can test again immediately before planting to make sure your amendments have worked. And definitely test again in the fall once the season is over to see what you've lost from the soil during your growing season. Hemp is a very heavy feeder and it's a fast grower. And so if your soil fertility is not established prior to planting, your plant starts out not healthy and it is a downward spiral from there and very hard to catch up with. Janie has done a great job. They manage a farm on the eastern shore of Virginia in Bird's Nest, Virginia. And Janie has become a soil testing professional extraordinaire. Janie, do you want to talk a little bit about a grower's perspective on soil testing and just some of the challenges and things that you've learned?
Yeah, so the first time that we tested soil, we really were not sure what we were doing, but then we got to be professionals really quickly. So we took advantage of the cooperative and sent in a lot of testing at first. And then we realized like how to actually do it. And we ended up making a grid of our 20 acres. And if you hear that, it's not a child crying, it's our cat talking. But we ended up making a grid of the 20 acres and then mapping out that grid and then digging down about 6 to 8 inches of that soil and not getting the very top of the soil, but trying to go down to get a good chunk of that soil, and then putting it in a big plastic bin, each one of the samples, and then taking that map and just kind of checkering, like you're playing checkers, checkering all over the 20 acres. And then we went back with our huge container and just, mixing it up. And it took us, at least an hour to really feel like we had it mixed really well. And then we took samples of that and put those in the Ziploc bags and sent those off for testing.
Awesome, and that's the best technique to take that subsamples into a homogenized master sample, and then getting a really representative feel for what's happening in your field. So that's an awesome strategy. V, can you advance, please? Once you take your samples, as Janie described, those homogenized samples from all over your acreage, the key things that you're looking for in your soil test is soil pH. pH determines which nutrients are and are not available to the plant. It can affect the ability of the plant to access things. It can make things prevent things from being accessed by the plant. It can render things trapped in the soil. It can mobilize things that are bad. So you really want to make sure that your pH level is optimized. An ideal range is between 6 and 7.5. When you're talking about hemp specifically, narrowing it down in that 6.2 to 6.8 is your ideal. Like if you're playing darts, you want to hit the bullseye of 6.2 to 6.8 pH. You're looking at balancing macro and micronutrient concentrations as well. Your big NPK or your macros, and then all of your other small things, your boron, calcium, magnesium. Boron is one that we see a lot of issues with during the season. It's the first thing that tends to show up as a deficiency across outdoor grows. And so it's really important to monitor those micros. Percent organic matter in your soil is also essential. It affects your soil's ability to hold moisture, to hold nutrition, to make that nutrition available to the plants. And depending on how decayed it is, it can actually hold nitrogen hostage and prevent your plants from accessing nitrogen. And so understanding how your organic matter is functioning is essential. We also look at cation exchange capacity, and it's abbreviated CEC. This is your soil's total capacity to store exchangeable cations that provide plants with nutrition. And you're looking for a CEC above 11. If your CEC is below 11, remediation of some nature may be called for. And in that case, you're looking at adding organic matter as the best way to modify CEC. Janie, did you guys encounter any major soil issues that you had to remediate?
Sorry. No, actually we didn't. We were very fortunate. I was holding my breath. We sent our soil off to Waypoint Analytical. They have special testing for hemp soil that you can have done specifically if you're going to be growing hemp. And I was holding my breath for those 2 weeks, like, please let it be okay. And we were very fortunate that we had, really good clean soil, and that we didn't need to do anything to that. So then the next step was, testing our water irrigation.
When you say clean soil, did y'all test for heavy metals and herbicide contaminants and everything, the whole pantheon of testing, nutrition and chemical carrier residues?
Yes. So what we specifically asked for were the RA 8 metal study. And then there is a multi-residue pesticide and herbicide scan specifically for growing hemp.
And that's so important for hemp, because hemp, as we all know, is a phytoremediator, a bioremediator. And so if there's anything yucky like that in the soil, heavy metals, pesticide residues, industrial residues, things that have accumulated in animal waste. If you're converting a field from grazing or confinement operations like poultry houses into pasture or into crop fields, that stuff builds up in the soil, and hemp happily takes it up and puts it into its parts. And when you send your flower away or your isolate away for testing, you have contamination and your product can't be sold. So that is a key, component of the soil testing, is not only nutrition, but also looking for those contaminants as well. Will you advance, please, V? So Janie mentioned that once she tested her soil, she didn't have any fertility challenges, which is awesome. Usually you're looking at NPK modifications, best case scenario. Worst case scenario, you have heavy metal issues, pesticide issues, micronutrient challenges, and all of those have to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. So there really is not a single recipe for blanket hemp nutritional recommendations. It really is a farm-by-farm and field-by-field process. You can add soil amendments in the spring in granular form before you plant, and that allows you to establish a fertility program for the first 4 to 5 weeks of your grow. And then once the plants are established, you want to focus on feeding through fertigation via drip tape, as well as foliar feeding. Granular fertilizer during the season tends not to break down as quickly enough for hemp plants and doesn't fix things as quickly as you need it to. And so you're really looking at liquid fertility for the grow season. Go ahead, V. So once you test your soil and you figure it out, you need to test your water, because your water and your soil work together with each other. They support each other's health and well-being. And they also can have antagonistic chemistries, which means you fix your soil and then water it with unbalanced water, and the water neutralizes acids and makes your soil go alkaline, or acidifies your soil and drops your pH too low. So testing your water in the fall before spring is really important. This allows you several months to resolve any imbalances. Your water test will conduct pH, salinity, heavy metals, alkalinity, a series of nutrients, potassium, nitrogen, things like that. And we actually have over in the handout section of the presentation of the webinar here, the water testing sheet. And so when you get your water test results, you can plug them into our handy little chart, and it'll tell you if your tests are low, high, or right where they need to be. And then you can use that tool to evaluate your test results and come up with solutions. If your water quality is poor, you may need to transfer it to a reservoir to balance its contents. When you transfer it to a reservoir, it's like treating a swimming pool. You modify the pH, you modify the heavy metal content, the hardness, the softness of the water, and you do all of that in a reservoir system. You can also use your irrigation system to deliver fertility to your plants. And so once your water is balanced and it's working in conjunction with your soil, you are then able to fertigate cleanly and without modifying your soil or your water chemistry. And Janie, I know that you had a really complex water situation. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you guys handled what you were working with there on the Eastern Shore of Virginia?
Yeah, so we ended up testing not only our irrigation system, but the irrigation systems around us, just in case. Because it was our first year growing with you guys, and we just really wanted to see what was best for us to do. And our testing came back with a little high sulfur, and we noticed that whenever we would use the water, it smelled a little bit like eggs, and that ended up being a little bit in our benefit, because we found out later that sulfur was a good pest control when we talked to the other farmers. And so it didn't hurt the plants. It actually ended up being better in our situation. And we ended up not being able to add any amendments to our water, because after July, we just hit this rainy season and we only irrigated about 4 times. So we didn't get to add any fertility, amendments to our irrigation system.
That was a big challenge for the East Coast this year, was too much water instead of not enough. A lot of people had those fertility challenges. And in that case, it sounds like you guys had really great foundational fertility from the beginning of the season and didn't suffer really at all with soil fertility or plant nutrition quality throughout the grow. So that was an incredible, your 2020 grow was an incredible grow. It went really, really well. Can you advance, please, V? So developing your irrigation plan is very individualized again. Drip irrigation, central pivot, drop down, subsurface are all options. The key is that hemp requires irrigation close to the base of the plant to avoid standing water on the flowers and the foliage. This is especially true once the plants are in full flower. And so if you are using some sort of overhead irrigation, using drops to place the moisture down into the canopy as opposed to over the top of the plant is advised. Go ahead and move forward, V. Row spacing again is determined by your region, soil type, and hemp varieties. Bigger varieties need more space, smaller varieties need less. Knowing your row spacing early is going to let you determine how many plants per acre to purchase, your weed control and irrigation. Typical spacing is 4 to 5 feet between plants for these high CBD hemp varieties, and we at Front Range can work with you individually to help you plan your grow and determine your row spacing. Go ahead, V. Final thing you do before planting is preparing your soil. You've got your fertility optimized, your nutrition optimized, you have your irrigation optimized, you're ready to go. So you're going to plow, disc, and till to prepare your soil. Moldboard plow, disc, and a rotary tiller are pretty common across the country. There are alternatives like no-till, low-till, or modified till with a spader. We have several people who have done bare ground with green manures and living mulches. So there's a lot of many ways to successfully prepare your soil, but plow, disc, and till is really the most common. You need to consider your farm geography and to prevent runoff, to address drainage concerns and direct water flow. And the USDA has some great resources online to help you plan that. And again, the goal is not to over-till your soil. The goal is to fluff it up and make it safe, happy, easily accessible place for the plant root system. And so you're not trying to damage it. You're not trying to go as deep as you possibly can. You're trying to fluff the soil in the root zone and get good soil contact with your plant roots and allow your little seedlings and clones to move their roots into the soil easily. Go ahead, V. Weed control is again tied to road spacing and variety choices. If you use plastic mulch, which is the industry standard at this point, it's going to suppress a lot of the weeds, and you'll only have to weed between the or in the row middles. You can also do bare ground with hand weeding, machine cultivation, flame weeding. Again, living mulches and green manures are a good choice. But for right now, polyethylene plastic mulch coupled with double drip tape is the preferred method. And that's the option that they used at Riley Smiles in 2020, and it worked really well. Go ahead, V. So now that you've got your fields totally prepared, Ben Holmes is going to tell you about the most important puzzle piece in their successful grow, which are the best genetics possible. And so I'm going to hand it off to Ben, and Ben and Janie are going to cover varieties. Thank y'all.
Thank you. It's always nice to listen to you talk, Megan. You know your stuff, and it's a pleasure working with people like you. So what I'm talking about today are genetics and your choice in genetics. We are a genetics company, and that's kind of where this part comes in. Your success as a hemp farmer, it's based on a lot of things. A lot of what Megan talked about, your fertility program, your soil prep, all that. But when it gets down to it, if your plants are substandard or your seed is substandard, your results are going to be substandard. And there are ways to avoid that and key things to look at. So first thing is you want to find seed that's viable, has a high germination rate. So when you look at seed from a vendor, they should show you a germination test. It should be from an independent third-party lab. We use the Colorado State Seed Lab at CSU Fort Collins, and they're about the authority in the state. So we use them for that purpose. And as far as what you should look for in those numbers, you should be buying seed with a germination rate, a viability rate, somewhere in the mid-90s or higher. And that sounds like a tall order, but other seed crops are in that same range. Fresh seed that's well finished and well produced and cared for, it should be in that high 90s, mid to high 90s percentile. The next in these plants, you've got to have good root development, and that is in some ways controlled by soil, a lot of ways controlled by moisture and fertility, but at the very base, it's controlled by the genetics. So a plant that doesn't root well is really of no value to you. The saying that what is above is as is below, or something like that. I think that was I learned that some time ago. I can't remember how it goes, but anyway, the point is that what you see above the ground and what is happening below the ground are roughly equal. So a small root is going to produce a small plant. A large root, conversely, will produce a larger plant. And that's really what you're looking for, are plants that develop a good root system and to support that superior above ground growth. Uniformity of growth and vigor. Now these come into play in a lot of ways. Uniformity really is about stability. It's about seed developers taking the time to work through their lines, work out the negative traits and to reinforce those positive traits, and to do it in a way that the seed reproduces along the row. You get a similar plant size and a similar result. So that uniformity is important. One, it helps with modeling your yield. You can harvest a row and then count the rest of the square footage and figure out what you've got in the field. It also it's just important to be able to harvest them easily, and uniformity is really comes into play there. Being able to attack them the same way at the same point. Some plants are really too small to get underneath easily, and some are way too big for an individual to handle. So there's that. So vigor sort of, I think, is self-descriptive. You want the most. You want the most yield you can get out of a plant in a field in a given set of conditions. So vigor is something that we breed for. It's something that it comes with working with stable parents and crossing those parents together. Pest resistance is that's a largely genetically determined trait, and that comes in a lot of forms. It can be in the form of flower shape and flower structure. It can be in the form of the habit of the plant, how it sits on the land. Plants that hang into the dirt, we have low branches that are touching the soil and they're getting wet, picking up microbiology, picking up arthropods. You want to avoid that. You want a more upright habit on your plants, so you keep those branches and those flowers up safe out of the dirt. So that's kind of a plant structure thing, which was the next line on here. But that plant structure with regards to pest resistance is really an upright habit. With regards to appropriate habit for an environment, here in Colorado, we have winds that are impressively fast, and we do it in other parts of the country, but ours have nothing to stop them. It's the plains. So this stuff just moves across the land at incredible speeds. And plants that are tall and real flag-like, they'll succumb to that wind, they'll break. And plants that are a little lower to the ground have a more round, sort of ball-shaped structure to them, nice upright, but small or smaller. They do better in the wind here. So you really have to look at your environment. If you have low sunlight, you might look at something like leaf shape. If you can have a wider leaf versus a narrower leaf. If you look at moisture in your environment, you want a flower and a plant that is easy to shed moisture. And that is to say that the flowers are an open structure, have a little more space in between the individual flowers on the colas, and it allows the moisture to evaporate when it contacts rain or really high condensation and high humidity parts of the country. So consider that. An appealing fragrance. Most of the CBD that's processed is stripped down to a very, very narrow set of chemicals out of the plant, and oftentimes the fragrance that comes in the flower is lost in the extract. So if fragrance is important to you, and that would be in the case of growing for smokable flower, or for something where you're going to do a cold extract and try and retain that character of the smells, the terpenes, that's an important thing. If you're just going to strip this down and make it into isolate, it's not appealing to you from a nose standpoint. But we loop back into pest resistance, and there are terpene-rich plants that are better at resisting arthropod attacks than others without the terpenes. So the nose plays in it in a couple ways, but it also really has to tie into the end product that you're looking to produce. Compliant Delta-9 THC. No matter what anybody tells you, we are all under the same set of rules, and that's the Federal Farm Act, and that the document following that was based on the final rule. And in the final rule, it addresses Delta-9 and the acid, the THC acid, which is in some cases states have ignored that, but we're all under the same rule now. So Delta 9 compliance is important, and you can't really ignore it. So something that breed very diligently to achieve those targets and those compliant plants. It's not an easy thing because you're balancing performance with compliance, and it is a balancing act. So if your seed maker is putting the time into that, it should show in the finished product. Ease of harvest is important, and we get back to that shape and that form factor of the plant. The amount of wood where the plant leaves the earth is above ground part. It can range from a ½ inch on a finished plant, some smaller, up to several inches, 2, 3, 4 inches in diameter, which it gets out of the realm of using loppers and into the realm of using a chainsaw or some tool that can cut through that wood. And so that is really, it plays into that form factor, plant structure issue. And that is plants that are really tall, they tend to get more buffeted by the wind, and they tend to get more woody at the base and more difficult to harvest. So consider that again. There's a lot of considerations in here. It all ties in. It's not an easy game. There's a lot of factors to growing hemp, and you really need to be aware of what you're growing and what you're putting in the field. That's all I've got. Is there another slide? Okay, so regional risk, we kind of covered some of this. When you're choosing genetics, you have to look at your climate as primary. Your access to sun, your day length, your season length are all important. Climate plays into this probably more heavily than anything. We ran the largest field trials in hemp in the United States last year in 22 different locations. We were all over the country. California, West Coast at the University of California sites, through the West, all the way into the Eastern Seaboard, up and down. We were everywhere this year, and we had a chance to see all the weather, just all of it. And I know Janie had some significant weather in her. I've heard stories in her farm this last year, but it's something you have to look at, that climate as an important part when you go to choose the flower. Your issues really are going to be moisture retention in the flower, and dense foliage that traps moisture, mold, mildew, spores. Those are the things that will attack those plants. So open flower structure, more space in between the foliage, a narrower leaf will generally be an advantage. And in drier climates, it really comes down to desiccation, how much wind and heat the plant take place. Parts west, you look for something that has a really deep root, significant root production, and then a plant that's shorter, a little more squat. We don't need that open and structure. We don't worry about moisture here. So anyway, that's all I have on that. I think that's it for my slides.
Jamie, do you want to talk for just a second about which of the varieties, you trialed all 30 varieties in 2020 and had a huge range of traits and characteristics and different phenotypes to choose from across those 30 varieties. What performed best in your region, and what was your favorite?
Well, I do have to say that the Valerie did perform the best in our area out of the trials. We had 5 or 6 ladies that were de-stemming our hemp, and we listened a lot to them as well as to what they were able to de-stem most successfully, as far as, they were looking for mold, they were looking for, at the end of the season we had issues with caterpillars, because they would get into the broad leaves and make cocoons. And so we were looking for cocoons. We were looking for, because the caterpillars would fall off, we'd shake them out and they would fall off. But we were looking for mold cocoons. We were looking for any kind of rot, anything. And then also what was easier to strip off. And when they got to those Valeries, they loved them because they didn't find a single cocoon. They didn't find anything that even resembled mold, because even if it resembled it, they chunked it. They didn't find anything that resembled mold. They loved the fragrance of it. And not only that, when Riley would walk through the field, she never had to look at the little tags or the signs. She always knew which one was Valerie, because she just loved the smell of the Valerie. And she has epilepsy, and they always say that if you're drawn to the smell of the plant, that's usually the one that you need. And so she was drawn to that one. And then when we had it tested, I realized why she was drawn to it. And because of the CBDV and all that was higher in it. So that one definitely has to be our favorite. And even when it was hanging and drying, we could tell that it was going to be really easy for them to strip and clean. The other one that was super easy to clean was the Panacea. That one just when it came off the stems, it just came off really clean. It didn't have a lot of times when you're cleaning hemp off the stems, you'll get like little pieces of the stick or the branch sometimes with it, and you have to go through it a little bit more. That one just came right off without any sticks or stem in it, and so that one came off really clean as well. So I would have to say that the Panacea and the Valerie, as far as working with it hands-on, were the best ones to work with. Definitely for our farm.
That's awesome. And Ben's really, really happy to hear that about Valerie, because that's named after his lovely wife. So that is his tribute to her. So she can be very honored, Ben, and that it's an amazing performer in all of our trials. Well, thank you all so much. Go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say that those two plants are, it was nice of you, Jenny, to say that, but it's nice that it came from your experience and not, just being nice. But anyway, what I wanted to say was those are two very different plants. The Panacea is a CBG only plant, so it produces primarily cannabigerol, CBG, or the acid, and that is that's currently unregulated, like it's not a THC, and that plant is very popular. We've had a lot of farmers grow that. The Valerie is very different in the chemotype. It's a CBD background, and it does have some varin in it, like you mentioned, but it carries a very large amount of CBC at maturity, cannabichromine, and that is really kind of points to our breeding philosophy, or our breeding efforts have been more towards the minor cannabinoids than they have towards the CBD. There's a lot of CBD out there. And when it comes to differentiating yourself as a farmer and selling your crop at the end of the year, the minor cannabinoids offer you a way to distinguish your products from the straight CBD products. And CBC in the Valerie line, we've had plants hit 3%, and we were just absolutely excited. We had it recently in the last month, found a pheno that produces 5%. And so our goal is to turn that into a major cannabinoid and try and put 10% with it, which is not something that we can do easily, but we're heading in the right direction. Yeah, it's a very different chemotype, and I'm glad you enjoyed growing it.
Awesome, Ben. Thank you so much for that information. You are incredible in your knowledge of how this works within the plant. It's awesome. So Bea, would you advance to the final slide, please, so people can take a look at our contact information? And we're looking through the questions here. Feel free, if you have questions, to go ahead and type those in. Sierra, are you still on with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome.
I wanted to let everyone know in the handout section, there are some tools for you guys, some handouts. We have our product catalog there for you. We also have a crop plan checklist that kind of goes over what we talked about today. And then we also have that water testing log in there that Megan mentioned earlier. You should be able to download those and print those out. If not, send us an email and we can get those sent to you as well. We do have some questions. I'm gonna start asking you guys. There was a few questions asked by Mike Faust earlier. Mike, those were answered in the question toolbar there for you if you haven't seen them already. One question we have from Jonathan Eagle is, has FRB researched triploid hemp seed production, and are there negative effects associated with flower morphology, disease susceptibility, and phytochemical profile?
I can address that and say that we've begun to look at the triploids and double haploids, and it's an interesting route, and we probably at some point will deploy those in development, but at this point it's a novelty to us as method, so we're really at the learning stage on that.
Okay. Veronica, how can this webinar be viewed later by our participants?
We will be sending it out as well as posting on our website.
Great. Okay, another question coming in from Mike. CBD and THC concentrations in the plant are generally linked. At what concentration of CBD do you typically begin to see an issue with exceeding the 0.3% total THC limit?
Okay, so there's two things to answer there. The first is depends on the ratio between the two. They'll be expressed at a fairly fixed ratio, not always from early leaf to maturity, but in flower. So if you have something, let's say at 30 to 1, 30 times CBD to 1 time THC, that'd be 9% at 0.3. That's the simple math, but the nuance of the law is that there is this uncertainty factor that they allow in the testing, which means in our state we can go up to 0.39 before it goes to 0.4, and that's so 0.39 times 30 is a little higher. So it really depends on your uncertainty on the testing and the ratio of the plant CBD to THC.
On that note, we have a question that was asked: what is the highest CBD to THC ratio in any of your CBD specific genetics?
We've seen some pretty high ratio stuff in the field. It's almost impossible to hold anything higher than 30 to 1. It's a very difficult thing to do. And so we shoot for that. We are able to achieve it in clonal lines. In seed lines, it's a little less, it's a little more difficult to achieve, but you really should be looking at around 30 to 1. That's reality. If someone's offering you 40 to 1 stable in the field, I'd like to test that. If it's coming in at 10 to 1 or 20 to 1, that's something to be concerned about on the other end. Obviously, because the multiplier, it reduces your CBD production by the time you hit terminal THC. So.
All right, and Frank Jan was asking if we have genetics for lower latitude areas.
We do have several great varieties. We have the Abigail, which initiates at 12.5 hours. And that is one that you could grow down, in Florida, down on the peninsula successfully. We also have Southern Spice, which is a great variety for the Gulf Coast areas and the Southwest. It initiates, off the top of my head, at 13.5. And so she's another one that does really well there in the deep south. And Abigail too is a beautiful plant, long variety time or long flowering initiation time, and just really successful for those dual purpose crops of both flower and biomass toward the end of the season. You could expect Abigail to come out of the field in late October, early November in most cases. Those would be my number one and number two recommendations: the Abigail and the Southern Spice. Ben, what about you? Do you have any other top choice?
No, I think you're spot on. I don't want to keep plugging this thing, but you could grow the Valerie fairly well in North Carolina, South Carolina, and the peninsula of Florida. I haven't seen it finished there, but we are trialing in Hawaii right now, and so far I'm hearing good things. That's the lowest latitude in the U.S. So we'll know more in a few months.
Awesome.
I want to mention too, Megan, that the Abigail and the Valerie both did well during our hurricane.
That is really good information to have, because if you're going to the deep south, you're normally in Hurricane Alley, and the Abigail, the Valerie, and the Southern Spice, all three, I think they had really great survival rates, Janie, because you took what, one direct hit and one partial hit, is that correct? In 2020?
Yeah, we had a little twister come through.
Oh man, it was replanting plants. So to attest to the quality of these genetics, these plants blew over at a 45-degree angle to the ground, uprooted as large plants, 3 and 4 foot tall plants, and Janie and her crew planted them back into the ground and had, what would you say your survival rate was, Janie? It was well over 95%.
Oh yeah, we only lost about 52 plants.
On how many acres?
5 acres.
5 acres. So drop in the bucket, all told, for a direct hit from a hurricane and your own tornado. Sierra, do you want to go through the other questions?
Yes. Dale was asking where we can find more information on the 2 strains mentioned earlier. Dale, you can find information on the catalog posted here in the handout sections or on our website, frontrangebio.com. You can also email our sales team and we can get you additional information like COAs and etc. Phil had another question about what is the shortest flowering window time frame, meaning 8, 9, 10 weeks, etc. at full maturity.
Ben, wouldn't you say probably the Pinnacle Pine and the Panakia tie for first 6 to 8 weeks?
Yeah, those are the fastest ones we have to finish. Yeah.
And the Pinnacle Pine is incredible. It's a CBD variety, and it has terpenes that are incredibly strong. It smells like cannabis, and they hold through dry and cure. It is just an exceptional variety. And because of its fast finish time, it makes a great choice for greenhouse or a great first out of the field in an outdoor season. It's a wonderful one.
Mike had a question about Valerie and how she would perform in subtropical climate.
Subtropical, how far did we go? How low did we go?
So we had Valerie in Fairhope, Alabama, and she performed really well. The question would be subtropical in terms of climate, like weather, or subtropical in terms of actual latitude, because I think the photo period is going to be the biggest restriction there.
Right.
Valerie is mold resistant, humidity resistant. We had sites that were flooded. We had sites that were hit by multiple hurricanes, and Valerie again and again and again just performed at the top of the pack. And so really the limitation, I don't think, is going to be the subtropical climate. I think it's going to be, can you grow her where your day length is? We grew her in a temperate tropical rainforest here in Western North Carolina on the bank of a creek, and it had, I mean, the air was wet. It was so humid, and she performed beautifully. She was the grower's #1 choice. 0 instance of mold and mildew. The flowers stay open a lot longer and don't dent up as quickly, and they resisted molding on the interior of the colas, which is a big problem here in the really humid mountain areas. And so I think that Valerie would do an incredible job if your day length requirements are adequate.
All right, I don't know if we have any more right now. Oh, here we go. Okay, Timothy Crawford asked, what disease and pathogens are plants most susceptible to? He also wants to talk about insects, mites, nematodes.
Russet mites are probably the biggest one. If your field suddenly looks like it got hit with a flamethrower and the roots are fine and the stems are fine and your field looks like it just dried up and blew away, it's russet mites. We had things that looked like nutritional pathology and things that looked like maybe root fungal pathology, and in every case it turned out to be russet mites. And so that's probably the biggest mystery one that I encountered in 2020. Not a whole lot of nematode pressure, not a whole lot of general insect pressure. Caterpillars definitely like the flower, and when the colas start to stack and really come on and the terpenes really start to develop, the caterpillars come out of the woodwork. Multiple instars on the same plants, multiple species. We had striped armyworm, we had corn earworm / tomato fruitworm. I think that sunflower capture crops are a really successful treatment. We had a lot of growers in the Southeast, especially, who would do like 6 to 10 foot wide borders or rows of sunflower to catch those caterpillars, and that made a big difference. And then you just better love picking caterpillars. And you walk through the field. We had another grower who would take a wiffle ball bat through the field, and she would hit the plants with a wiffle ball bat and run a flock of chickens through the field and let the chickens eat the caterpillars that she knocked off with a wiffle ball bat. That was very successful. So you got to get creative, especially since we have such limited access to chemistries in terms of pesticides. But Janie, I don't, did you encounter any nematode issues, or Ben? I mean, I'm not aware of any pressing nematode concerns.
I'm not either. On the moth issue here, it was Miller moth this year. We had the largest bloom of Miller moth that we had in a decade, and it was impressive what they could do to one plant. And
Yeah.
they seem to pick on one plant and leave others completely untouched. So I find that interesting. But, yeah.
Oklahoma and Texas were pretty hard hit with the hemp borer as well, and it was the same thing. It was really sporadic infestation. It was not a whole plague through the field. So caterpillars number 1, mites number 2, straggling random insects based on region probably number 3 for that one. And then I see Mike up here. Go ahead.
Aphids, I think, were an issue at late harvest in Colorado, at least. And
Yep.
you know, there's really not a lot you can do. Maybe pyganic. Pyrethrin.
So the question is, Valerie available as seed? Ben, do you want to take that one?
Right. We're offering seed this year in a very limited amount. It's the first year selling seed in this line. So that's available. We also have some select clonal lines that are just phenomenal plants on their own. There's an advantage to one over the other, seed versus clone. I'll touch on it quickly. The most important is seed will wait. If you buy seed and you put it in the can and put it in the barn, it'll sit there as long as nothing eats it. It'll be there when you come for it. Small plants, they need your care the moment you take possession. So in my opinion, seed is the way to go these days.
All right, so we've got time for about 2 more questions, which I will take, and then we'll probably have to sign off. But feel free to reach out to us at sales@frontrangebio.com, and we will be able to answer all your questions. So let's see, Dale had a question. He said, which strain will perform better in high desert Wyoming? The microclimate produces a dry air, no moisture, so mold doesn't seem to be an issue.
Okay, so the eastern plains in Colorado are very similar. It's windswept, it's sandy, alluvial soil. It's basically the erosion of the Rockies. And we've grown there outdoors. We've had a few people that have grown these lines outdoors in similar climates. I know Wyoming is a fairly new program, 1 or 2 years in existence, but I would say anything that did well here in Colorado, or anything that did well at our UC A&R site in, or was that Barstow or Baker, I forget. But hard rocky soil or tough sandy soil, that's kind of the what goes along with those windy conditions. And wind in Wyoming is, my understanding is pretty intense. So I would say anything that we produce that a faster producing or finishing variety and a low slung short plant that's not going to expose itself to that wind and desiccation. So the Valerie clonals, the Valerie seed. What else do you think? What did well at UCANR? I forget.
We didn't trial everything at UCANR. I think the Pinnacle Pine would be a good choice. It's a really sativa leaning variety, and it's a fast finisher. And it's a smaller plant too. And so just in terms of like aerial parts, it's not going to take as hard of a hit. But I think the Valerie would do really well if you want like a mid-season. The Pinnacle Pine would be my early season. And based on growers I've talked to in that region of the country, they really don't want to go late season just because the extremes become more extreme as the year progresses. So I think the Valerie and the Pinnacle Pine would be my top 2. And then the Panakia for a CBG, I think would do well.
Yeah.
Okay, last question from Sean. Sean wants to know any recommendations for specific beneficials to fight caterpillars or other Lepidoptera species in general.
So the number one most successful thing, again, has been the trapping with the companion plantings, like giving them an alternative of something to eat that they like better. It's really hard to release beneficial insects into a field and get them to stay there. You can very easily do that in the greenhouse, and there are a lot of choices there. I mean, caterpillars, mantises, spiders, I've seen it all. Predatory wasps. There's a bunch of different things that you can do, but outdoors, capture crops, manual removal. You don't want to apply anything to your flower, which is why it's such a big problem, because you don't want to contaminate that final product with any sort of chemicals. Luring traps. We had a grower actually he had like 5 acres of grow, and he bought bug zappers and spaced them upwards away from the field, like so that they were shielded from the light, and put them on sheets of plywood so that the light wouldn't pollute the crop. And he ran bug zappers all night long and killed the adult moths. That worked as long as the light pollution didn't affect the photo period. Lures and pheromone traps are another option. You can place them outside the crop depending on species and lure them away. But it's going to be cultural controls more so than chemical options. Janie, did anything work for you that was, I know we picked a lot off by hand.
Yeah, well, we have plans of doing the sunflowers around the field, and we're also going to be doing a big row of sunflowers up the middle. And we happen to have, how many chickens do we have? 7 chickens. So we've purchased a kennel to put right in the middle of the field and let them out every day.
So second vote for chickens. Let them do the work for you and get fat. You have a dual crop, eggs and meat.
Yes. Well, one thing that we noticed is that when we would shake the plants out, and the chickens just love all these caterpillars, we started getting double yolk eggs. So that's just something to keep in mind.
There you go. So everyone wants to diversify their hemp income. There you go. Egg and meat production, special double yolked eggs. That's awesome. Well, thank y'all so much. I'm going to hand it back over to Sierra.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Janie, Ben, Megan. You guys were great. I hope everyone learned a little something today. Thank you, everyone.